Welcome to the 18 Minutes Podcast. You guys, I have been sick all week. Today I'm finally feeling good enough to record. This episode is coming out tomorrow, so I've got a lot of work to do this afternoon. You know that feeling when you have a cold and you're congested and you just feel like, when I am better, I'm going to run a marathon, do everything I've always wanted to do, and I'm never going to take life for granted once I feel good. I feel like I'm at that point where my symptoms are pretty much subsided. I can actually breathe through my nose again, and I'm feeling energized. So I've spent a lot of time working today. Also did some house stuff that I need to get done. One thing I'm working on is getting my ebook out there. I launched an ebook a couple weeks ago. Ebook is a strong word. It's 17 pages, but it covers all of the primary principles that I talk about that helped me recover from my disordered anxiety. I wanted a place where I could refer people to who message me on social media who have questions about these core topics that I'm always talking about. So I wrote them all down. You can get it on my website for $10. There's also a free one-page consolidated version. So feel free to start there. And then if you like that or you find that's helpful, then you can go and purchase the $10 full version. I think it's really valuable. I spent a lot of time just writing drafts and whittling things down and putting more information and rewording things. So if you're new to all this and you're feeling like you can't quite grasp the whole picture of what I'm talking about, then the ebook is definitely a good resource for you. Back to being sick really quick. Being sick, even having a mild cold, used to make me so anxious because I would feel like I couldn't breathe. Being able to have a cold and just rest and get better and not have anxiety spikes every day is a new experience for me in the last 5 years. And adding that to my list of reasons why I feel so passionate about talking to people about all of these practical behavioral changes you can make to change the neural pathways in your brain, because there's so many little things in life that it affects aside from having less anxiety. So I'm feeling good today. I'm ready to chat. Let's get into it. Keep in mind before I get started that I am not a licensed therapist. I'm not a medical professional. All of the content that I put out, including this podcast, is based on my own personal experience with anxiety disorders. And please heed any advice that you get from your medical professionals. Okay, so today we're talking about reassurance. If you have disordered anxiety, I can almost guarantee that this applies to you. People who have disproportionate anxious reactions to things look for reassurance that they're not going to die or that they're not going to go crazy. So this episode is all about what that is, why we do it, why we shouldn't do it, and how to practice other behaviors instead that are more helpful to our recovery. So first, I want to talk about assurance. There are some things about anxiety disorders that you can have assurance in. Anxiety will not make you go crazy. Anxiety will not kill you. Anxiety comes with a plethora of physical and mental symptoms that are uncomfortable and unpleasant. And anxiety is a normal human response to stress. Learning about anxiety disorders, and particularly your anxiety disorder, whether that be panic disorder, agoraphobia, social anxiety disorder, generalized anxiety disorder, or related disorders like OCD and PTSD, can be very helpful, and I personally think necessary in order for us to move forward with practices that move us toward recovery. So learning and getting information about your particular mental health issue is a good thing. Knowing the mechanisms in your brain and body that are causing you to feel this way can be really empowering and also relieve some anxiety when you know that there's an explainable reason for it. So reassurance is simply getting assurance again. One example of reassurance is waking up in the middle of the night with a racing heart and Googling, can anxiety cause your heart to race in your sleep? Even though you've looked that up twice a week for the last 3 months. Reassurance in this case is reaching for information that you're okay, because telling yourself that you're okay is not working and you're looking to escape these intense feelings of anxiety. If you've listened to the podcast before, you've heard me talk about safety behaviors. Episode 3 is all about safety behaviors, and reassurance is just another safety behavior. Looking for assurance that you've already had can give you quick, probably subtle relief from your anxious thoughts and feelings, which is exactly what your anxious brain is telling you you need to do in that moment to feel safe. So Googling your questions you've already asked and know the answer to is a form of reassurance. Also, listening to this podcast could be a form of reassurance for you. I used to listen to anxiety podcasts in the car exclusively because I felt like it was the only way I could tolerate driving to work. If you have a habit of telling people around you how you're feeling all the time because you want them to say something like, oh, that sounds like anxiety, or oh, I feel like that all the time, and that brings you some kind of relief, that's also reassurance seeking. Okay, so why is this a problem? I do go into a deep dive in episode 3 about why safety behaviors keep us stuck in anxiety loops. So I'm just going to scratch the surface here, and you can go back and listen to episode 3 if you haven't already. When we feel anxiety, as someone with disordered anxiety, our brain's survival instinct kicks up a notch. Because of that, we get feelings like a racing heart in the middle of the night and all the other anxiety symptoms that we might experience. Because our brains in this state detect these thoughts and feelings as dangerous, our brains are going to look for a means of safety from the perceived danger. So it makes sense that when you wake up and you're having a panic attack, you're going to look for ways to immediately get some kind of relief. When you reach over and grab your phone to Google the question that you already know the answer to, your brain actually starts to decrease the production of stress-related hormones like cortisol and epinephrine, otherwise known as adrenaline, because it senses that the threat is being neutralized. So you might feel that effect of the slower production of those stress hormones and find that you're able to relax even just a little bit. The overarching message that's being communicated here is reassurance equals threat neutralized equals good strategy. The problem is that there is no threat. And the next time you wake up in the middle of the night feeling anxious, your brain is going to want that same method of safety again and again and again and again. Reassurance is also so easy for us to get with the internet, and specifically AI chatbots. I've gotten in some debates with other anxious people about whether or not using AI is helpful for treating anxiety disorders. My opinion, as someone who suffered from anxiety disorders and recovered, is that the use of AI chatbots is almost always a horrible idea for finding anxiety relief. This episode is not about AI chatbots, so I'm going to make this quick. But chatbots like ChatGPT are designed to mirror your preferences and keep you using the platform. Asking ChatGPT what you should do during an anxiety episode is risky when you're in a vulnerable state. I even consider that as a real human woman with real human anxiety experiences. Every time I create a piece of content on anxiety, because I'm not a therapist or a medical professional, and because I viscerally remember the feelings of desperation and hopelessness that I carried when I had intense anxiety, and specifically how desperate I was for any piece of information that could help me. That experience puts us in a vulnerable position, and ChatGPT, in its current form at least, is not capable of taking that into consideration to protect you from harmful misinformation. So I'm going to stop myself from getting heated about that, but my recommendation with using things like ChatGPT is to go ahead and ask it questions when you're feeling good, but know that it is constantly making mistakes. And please do not use it as a form of reassurance, and especially as a treatment for any mental health issue. For those of us who experience disordered anxiety, and I want you to hear this, we can never, ever, ever get enough reassurance. Ever. No amount of me or anyone else telling you that you're going to be okay is going to cause you to be recovered from your anxiety disorder. I wish that weren't the case, but because of the feedback loop that I just described, if you use reassurance as a means of avoiding feelings of anxiety, you're going to keep telling the fear center of your brain that the thoughts and feelings associated with anxiety are dangerous and they need to be treated immediately by seeking reassurance or whatever other safety behaviors you're using. Intention matters with safety behaviors. A safety behavior is only a safety behavior if you use it as such. For example, some people put ice packs on their neck and shoulders when they're feeling anxious to distract themselves from the anxious feelings they're having. Some people put ice packs on their neck and shoulders because they're having muscle cramps. The use of the ice pack for anxiety is only a safety behavior because you are trying to seek safety from an anxious feeling. Reassurance, in my mind, is its own category and deserves its own 30-minute spotlight for a few reasons. One, it's probably the most commonly used safety behavior. Second, because it's easily masked by feeling like you're just being reasonable. You're just gathering information. So it can be harder to detect as a safety behavior and might be a sneaky way that your progress is being hindered. Third, because there's really no other reason why you would be seeking it other than fear. If you don't remember that a certain symptom can be caused by anxiety, or whether or not anxiety can cause other problems for you, and you look for the information online or by asking someone else, then you're kind of looking for assurance. You're not really looking for reassurance. So reassurance is, in my experience, as a whole, an anxious behavior that always undermines our progress in recovering from disordered anxiety. Instead of using reassurance to find temporary relief, I'm a huge advocate of exposure and response prevention. This podcast is not a replacement for therapy or any psychiatric help. I simply recommend that you look into it. If you're somebody who has disordered anxiety, ask your therapist about it. Find a therapist who specializes in exposure therapy. One of the principles of exposure and response prevention is acceptance, which is essentially the response prevention part of the therapy. And so in the example of waking up in the middle of the night with a racing heart, instead of reaching for your phone to Google something you already know the answer to because you just want reassurance that you're okay, you can practice staying still, accepting that what you're experiencing is anxiety, and letting those feelings wash over you, as terrifying as they might be. And by doing that, you can actually allow them to move through you. You'll hear a lot of people say the only way out is through, and in the context of disordered anxiety, that could not be more true. Looking for reassurance that you're okay every time you feel anxious is fighting against the anxiety, and the fighting against is really what's fueling the anxiety in the first place. So instead of seeking reassurance, you can practice acceptance. You can practice doing the opposite of what anxiety is telling you to do. You can also practice positive self-talk. Whatever messages anxiety is sending you, like Google the answer to your question, call a friend and talk to them to distract yourself, pace around the house so you don't have to feel your heart beating as much. Think positively. Tell yourself it's anxiety. Tell yourself you're going to be okay. Tell yourself that you can lay there and accept these feelings, even though they're really, really scary and really, really uncomfortable. I also want to mention quickly that OCD is not technically under the umbrella of an anxiety disorder. It's its own category. But OCD is particularly treatable through exposure and response prevention, or ERP as it's called in the therapy world. And I know a lot of you who have different anxiety disorders also experience compulsions. And so that can be really helpful if that's something that you experience. In conclusion, my high school English teacher would be so proud. Reassurance is a safety behavior, and safety behaviors keep us stuck in an anxiety loop by teaching our brains that those safety mechanisms are keeping us safe from danger. Panic attacks, anxiety symptoms, anxiety thoughts are not dangerous to you. They don't need to be treated. There's your assurance. You can practice accepting your feelings of anxiety, even though it's scary. If you want more information on how I recovered from panic disorder and agoraphobia, you can grab that ebook or the free guide on my website. And if you have questions about reassurance-seeking or any anxiety-related topics, you can send me an email at amanda@the18minutes.com. I love getting your messages, so feel free to send me one anytime. I hope after listening to this episode, you have a good sense of what reassurance-seeking is, why it is not a treatment option for anxiety, and why it's not even a good idea to practice it, how you can recognize if you're practicing reassurance-seeking, and some better practices that will move you toward recovery instead of keeping you stuck with an anxiety disorder. Thank you so much for being here today, and we'll see you next time.